Picture this. You climb into bed after a long day of farming and feudal obligations, fully prepared to settle in for a cozy 8 hours of snooze. But wait, instead of drifting off to dreamland, you find yourself awake at midnight, engaging in, well, what can only be described as medieval multitasking between your first and second sleeps. Welcome to Boring History for Sleep, where we take a comedic deep dive into the surprisingly bizarre sleep habits of medieval people. Little did you know, our ancestors had a far more fascinating nighttime routine than binge-watching Netflix and scrolling mindlessly through social media. They used to kick the night off with what we might call a pre-sleep shift, followed by an unholy number of midnight interruptions. That's right. In the good old days, people would wake up halfway through the night and engage in activities that ranged from philosophical ponderings to plundering and, no, I don't mean ordering from Uber Eats. We'll shed light on these quirky practices that would make even the most adventurous insomnia sufferer blush. And just when you thought things couldn't get more absurd, stay tuned for a plot twist involving the Salem witch trials. Because what's a good night's sleep without a dash of paranoia and mass hysteria, right? It altered society in more ways than you might think, proving there's nothing quite like a good witch hunt to keep people awake and on the edge of their straw mattresses. So, grab your favorite bedtime snack, prepare for some historical hilarity, and let's embark on this journey through the rack of record snoozing. Spoiler alert, if you thought your sleep setup was complicated, just wait till you see how medieval folk perfected the art of nocturnal chaos. Here's to strange slumbers and sleepless societies. In the land of frozen fears and unrelenting feudal obligations, we find ourselves peering into the bizarre realm of medieval sleep habits. Cue the blacksmiths hammering from down the lane. The year is 1374. The setting is an oddly bright tavern outside a castle, built as a less than competent defense against hungry peasants. And what delicious aroma fills the air. The tantalizing scent of stale ale and undercooked bread, truly the caviar of the common folk. In this rustic, raucous establishment, we meet our eccentric cast of characters. Roderick the Restless, who is famed not for his exploits in combat, but for the valiant attempts to evade sleep at every turn, and Gertrude the Gloomy, a barmaid whose specialty lies in fulfilling requests for the most absurd brewing concoctions, all while incessantly lamenting the perils of too much shut-eye. The tavern is illuminated by flickering tallow candles, casting shadows that resemble disgraced knights. It's a place where sleep is about as welcome as a rabid dog. As the patrons gather, Roderick embarks upon his nightly mission. To prove that sleep is overrated and should be treated like last season's tunics. You see, in medieval times, there was a peculiar notion that sleep equated to laziness. He who dozed was promptly cast into the stocks for merely embracing the sweet embrace of Morpheus. Instead, the tavern developed an unusual ritual known as the Wake Alive feast, a gathering where the finest dried fish and questionable pickled vegetables would be served with one goal: to keep everyone wide-eyed and wired. Roderick's quest for sleep deprivation escalates quickly. Every hour a horn is blown, accompanied by a chorus of raucous medieval tunes that would make even the hardiest bard cringe. And there stands Roderick, force-fed lavishly over-spiced herring, a gastronomical torture disguised as a delicacy. It's a glorious image. Him, eyes bulging like a distressed fish, hands flailing like windmills. yelling that sleep is for the weak, while desperately eyeing a large barrel of ale, secretly praying for an end to the culinary nightmare. The tension builds as Gertrude misinterprets the noise as an uprising among the tavern's drunken patrons, and, armed with a ladle, she begins her own defense of the Alstained establishment, shouting warnings about intruders who are rather obviously just a few overly ambitious club singers. Meanwhile, Roderick sips the ale, a potion better suited for haunting dreams rather than nocturnal adventures, believing it to be the elixir of perpetual vigilance. But here's the twist. Just as Roderick stands on the brink of sleep, right there in front of the entire tavern, eyes fluttering like a startled pigeon, a traveling minstrel bursts through the door. He plops down his lute and begins a raucous ballad about the legendary sleepless night. Roderick, feeling the pressure of expectation and the weight of several generations of rest-free warriors, jolts awake and performs an expectedly terrible rendition of the dance that accompanies it, all to the roaring cheer and laughter of the crowd. Gertrude simply rolls her eyes, forever trapped in the cycle of unrewarding wakefulness. As dawn breaks, leaving the world wearing the broom of a new and evil day, Roderick finally collapses into a pile of hay outside the tavern, having learned nothing, while Gertrude pours the remnants of a misguided wake-up potion on his head for good measure. And you know what? This ridiculous adventure teaches us a lovely little lesson. Sleep is essential, no matter how medieval your sense of absurdity may be. So, bite down on that slice of stale bread, remember the noble Roderick, and remember that sometimes taking a nap in a pitchfork warehouse is just what the blacksmith ordered. Set your time machine for the year 1200, deep in the misty, more than slightly damp moors of England. It's a Friday night at Camelot, and rather than jousting or plotting the next great conquest, our favorite Round Table knights are about to embark on what can only be described as an epic nap-off. Yes, dear viewers, medieval men of valor appeared to be training for drowsiness, not battle. The lighting is provided solely by a few flickering torches that cast increasingly bizarre shadows over the knights' confused faces. The air is a heady blend of musty armor, burnt garlic from the poorly executed pep talk dinner dishes, and an unsettling amount of sheep wool. The feudal aroma alone could put a grown man to sleep faster than a lullaby sung by a particularly boring bard. Enter King Arthur, our beleaguered monarch, with a crown made from what's probably tin that never quite fit right, and a demeanor suggesting that he's had one too many flagons of ale. You can almost hear him recite the royal decree, "To sleep, perchance to dream, but first, let's yell at Lancelot for oversleeping again." Lancelot, of course, is slumped at the table, drooling onto his oversized plate, oblivious to not only the glare of his comrades, but the entire ethos of chivalry. Our kitchen table centerpiece, an enormous wheel of cheese the size of a wagon wheel, because naturally, nothing says, "Let's get ready for a night of thrilling sleep," like dairy products and the lurking threat of mild lactose intolerance. The knights have prepared several courses, each more calorically dense and lethargy-inducing than the last, culminating in what is known locally as the Feast of Snores. But let's not lose track of the real issue at hand, the superstitions. You see, every knight has a pre-sleep ritual that would make a modern hypnotherapist faint with laughter. There's Bedivere holding a wooden spoon, chanting incantations to the spirits of drowsiness, while Gawain insists on rubbing his sword with chamomile oil to promote good dreams. As for Sir Galahad, he's taken to fashioning makeshift pillows out of unsuspecting peasants' potatoes in order to achieve the perfect slumber experience. Amid the snoring symphony, a tense game of Who's the Snorer begins, with Camelot's knights postulating wildly about which of them is truly the champion of slumbering sounds. Arguments ensue over who let out the most impressive snore last night. Perhaps it was Gawain, whom they claim could shake the rafters, or Sir Percival's more subtle yet deeply concerning nasal harmonizing. Each historical knight tries to outdo the other, telling war stories of sleep disturbances instead of battle strategies. And the tension escalates to the remarkable point where they've begun placing bets. Somewhere in the back, a bard records their antics for what can only be described as a future epic sleep chronicles, destined to be ignored in the annals of time. Finally, Lancelot stirs. He awakens, albeit stained with crumbs from the cheese coma. His first act? Announce triumphantly that he's won the title of Grand Nap Champion merely by existing through the ordeal. Chivalry, ladies and gentlemen, merely a byproduct of an exceptionally imaginative imagination. The true art form here is, apparently, the noble pursuit of sleep. In an ironic twist, they all collectively realize that while they had discussed valor and grandeur before the feast, they had simply summoned the one true knight of Camelot. Sleep. The snack of the evening? Dreaming of vivid, fanciful quests slightly overshadowed by involuntary faceplants into dishes. Now for a small historical tidbit. Medieval chroniclers commonly believed that sleep was a divine gift, often considered a period when one could commune with angels and ancestors, rather than a time to recharge for the next great pre-battle brawl. An era that may not have valued a full night's rest, or a decent bed frame for that matter, was, strangely enough, obsessed with spiritual enlightenment through dreaming. So what is the moral here? When in doubt as a medieval knight, go for the snack plate of cheese and embrace your inner sleep champion. After all, one cannot conquer a kingdom without first conquering the land of Nod. In the year of our Lord 1253, amidst the bustling streets of Nottingham, a most peculiar assembly was occurring at the Round Table, and not the fabled one featuring gallant knights and extravagant quests. No, this was the lesser-known Round Table of Nocturnal Napping Awareness. A veritable who's who of medieval lords and sleepy peasants gathered to wax poetic about slumbering habits, while the smell of roasted pigeon and stale ale wafted through the hall, mixing with the unmistakable aroma of overgrown body hair and woolen textiles. An olfactory masterpiece that would put any modern air freshener to utter shame. As the evening sun dipped behind the thatched roofs, casting fuzzy shadows over the room, Sir Snoozelet, a knight whose bravery was overshadowed only by his deep adoration for mattress time, stood as the charismatic, pitiful spokesperson of this snoozathon. Dressed in chainmail pajamas, complete with embroidered sheep, he passionately argued for the noble art of the power nap, claiming it was not only an excellent way to avoid battles, but also the key to achieving inner peace. Perfect for those moments when one might consider that unwise decision to duel over a potato. "It is essential, dear comrades," Sir Snoozelet declared, a turkey leg dangling from his mouth as a painfully serious audience hung on his every word. Why waste good sword skills in the heat of battle when a brief siesta can sharpen your reflexes and stave off the existential dread of having to explain why you lost the last joust? He waved emphatically, catching a nearby squire's ear with a misguided elbow jab. The knights nodded gravely, semi-consciously attempting to pen their thoughts, which turned out to be a sublime mix of snores and chicken scratch, as they considered the nightmarish consequences of sleep deprivation. And so the evening continued, an intoxicating cocktail of yawns and aspirations, culminating in the inevitable tradition of midnight group napping, the true Olympic event of the medieval age. As the candles burned low and wax dripped dangerously close to their petunias, the napping knights collectively surrendered to the embrace of Morpheus. Their heads bobbed, lineup slightly resembling that of a modern-day Sunday League football match, creating a rather hypnotic pattern that alternated between crescendoed snorts and sudden jolts awake, interspersed with mild accusations of snoring evil spirits plotting against them. But as fate would have it, this was also the night that the local bard decided to debut his latest ballad, a melodious ode dedicated to the merits of sleep-related activities, much to the chagrin of those desperately clawing for a few moments of peaceful Z's. The haunting refrain of "Nap thy sore eyes, O slumbering chaps" rose up, echoing against the thatched ceilings, reverberating the sentiments of all who wished to break free from their sleepless turmoil. Yet as the melody crescendoed, so too did the audacity of the knights. One after another, they hurled their half-eaten chicken legs at the bard, who narrowly dodged each in a choreographed ballet of pure survival. In an unexpected twist of fate, a remnant turkey leg struck the ceiling banner, sending it crashing down on the bard mid-lyric. "Consciousness is overrated," he croaked as his words drowned in a sea of feathers, a poignant message that resonated profoundly with the now fully awake knights, who turned the bard's tune into a raucous chant. And thus, Nottingham quietly discovered that while one's head may be permanently lodged in a cozy pillow, one can still carry a war cry deep into the night, as long as it's performed at an audible volume. The knights exited the assembly, raving about sweet slumber as a new form of valor. Who knew that the noblest challenge might simply be surviving the onslaught of sing-alongs while attempting to snooze? So here's the lesson for you all. In medieval times, the art of napping was not just encouraged. It could also be a legitimate strategy for survival. Take heed, modern-day warriors. The next time you're confronted with an overwhelming task, remember, when in doubt, snooze it out. Fasten your sleeping masks, dear viewers, because we are rolling back the clock to the 14th century, a time when folks took their dreams as seriously as their medieval haircuts. Picture it, a cramped, dimly lit barn in the verdant English countryside. The air is thick with the smells of hay, livestock, and a hint of the local ale, a concoction so potent it could knock the feet off a stable horse. In the humble abode of a peasant named Godwin, not the most regal name, but he's certainly got a thing for dreams, the room is alive with the quiet sounds of snores more thunderous than a war drum. Tonight, though, something is different. Instead of the usual visions of endless wheat fields and a plump cow, Godwin is plagued by an unsettling dream of mice. Yes, mice, those pesky little rodents that had a peculiar tendency to invade both sleep and meal plans. And this wasn't just a run-of-the-mill nightmare. This was a calculated affront to his honor. In medieval England, dreams weren't merely figments of the imagination. They were seen as prophetic messages from the heavens, or hints from the underworld. Godwin, however, completely misread the celestial script and decided to consult the village's self-proclaimed dream interpreter, a toothless hag known simply as Maud. Her methods, a mix of chicken bones, spells, and the occasional wild dance under the moonlight, all while rambling through a potpourri of medieval superstitions as if reading tea leaves. Mice mean misfortune, Maud croaked, clearly channeling her inner oracle. Also, they might mean you should reconsider your lunch choices, but mostly misfortune. This revelation sent Godwin spiraling into hysteria. After all, can you really trust a dream interpreter who might misinterpret guinea pig for guinea plague? As word spread through the village faster than a rabid squirrel, neighbors began casting knowing glances. Couples whispered about Godwin the mouse dreamer over kitchen tables, and children started portraying him in elaborate shadow puppet shows using, ironically, more substantial than usual pieces of cheese. The tension rose faster than a yeast-risen loaf. Godwin found himself under constant scrutiny, often glancing over his shoulder as though the mice were following him in a tiny brigade. As paranoia mounted, he decided to hold a dream party to rid himself of this nocturnal nuisance once and for all. Invites flew around the village, perhaps with more enthusiasm than legibility. Come one, come all. Join me for a night of dreams, cheese platters, and a chance to confront my nemesis, he declared. As the night of the party arrived, the barn became a hub of activity. Villagers exchanged stories of their odd dreams while sampling locally made cheeses that might also qualify as study materials in a bioweapon lab. Meanwhile, Godwin, decked out in his fanciest tunic, which had recently seen a ketchup accident, prepared himself for the ultimate showdown with his dream foes. In the midst of this absurd dramatics, just before midnight struck, Godwin rushed to his bed, draped in the stench of slightly rancid hay and optimism, and fell asleep saying, "Fine, let's see if your mice haunt me in reality." As the clock ticked, his dreams morphed into a bizarre culinary showdown against not just mice, but also cheese, both of which gleefully danced around, suggesting that the real misfortune was on the horizon: heavy belly aches from overindulgence. When he finally awoke, Godwin rushed to the village square for the grand reveal. He didn't just confront his worst fears, he devoured an entire wheel of cheddar in 3 minutes flat. No mice in sight, just an audience of bewildered onlookers watching their neighbor transform into a cheesy legend. The moral of this enchanted tale? Remember, if your dreams are strange, eat something cheesy just to confront the absurdity. Who needs armed guards against misfortune when you have a well-stocked dairy shelf? Picture this: a dimly lit medieval tavern in the year 1278, reeking of stale ale and something that may have once been a chicken, or perhaps a dream. The sound of drunken revelry fills the air, intermittently punctuated by the occasional fishmonger shouting about the last sale of the day, drawing attention to the latest gossip. Did Geoffrey really fall asleep on Lady Eleanor's lap last night? Poor fellow, he snores louder than a dying horse. Amidst the raucous laughter and dubious hygiene, we find our protagonist, Sir Reginald the Snoozeful, a knight famed more for his impressive ability to nap than for his skills in battle. His armor gleams not with victories, but with remnants of the noble feasts he fell asleep at, right in the middle of a rousing story about dragon bravery or the latest scandal involving the local blacksmith's wife and a particularly amorous goat. tonight's feast? A grand banquet with roasted boar, herbed bread, and a mysterious stew bubbling in the corner, possibly made from the remnants of all the food Sir Reginald has dropped while dozing off. The atmosphere is thick with anticipation and stench, as the tavern has never been particularly enthusiastic about regular cleaning, much less air fresheners. Somewhere, a lute plays a melancholic tune, perfectly matching the ambiance of impending slumber. But lo, a cloud of paranoia looms over the hall as Lady Agatha, the court sorceress supposed to ward off evil spirits, announces that those who sleep with their heads touching the table would awaken possessed by the spirit of a goat, a fate worse than a hangover or a dubious educational encounter with mathematics. The scene is set, and anxiety thickens like the leftover stew. Sir Reginald, bless his sleepy soul, has already made a fortress of mashed potatoes around his plate to barricade himself against any potential food-related curses. He glances at his fellow knights, fear flickering behind their glazed eyes as they realize they may perchance drift into the dreaded gastronomic slumber against their will, perhaps even provoking a goat possession that would leave each man bleeding for help. Sir Reginald's nap-time safety ritual involves the old wives' tale of vigorous head-banging. In theory, banging one's head against the table would keep him awake. In practice, it looks like he's auditioning for a particularly odd bardic performance. Each thud sends ripples through the other diners, causing faint shudders as they grip their turkey legs tighter, convinced that the goat possession is right around the corner. Suddenly, disaster strikes. The stew pot tips, revealing a slimy eel that had mysteriously transformed into a food daemon during the cooking process. The crowd gasps. Did a fish just escape the mining of their mashed peas to fulfill a sinister plot? With adrenaline higher than the price of a week's wage in this tavern, the panic escalates. Sir Reginald's neck jerks. He had no idea exorcism was part of tonight's proceedings. The knights, now wide-eyed, leap to their feet, calling upon the long-forgotten prayers for protection against sloth, slop, and snoring. At this breaking point of tension, a rather cheeky goose waddles in from the tavern's back door, interjecting this melodramatic feast with a curious honk. With sheer audacity and a hint of unearned confidence, it struts over to Sir Reginald and promptly lays an egg right in the middle of his mashed potato fortress. Shocked murmurs arise. Could this be the sacrificial egg to ward off sleepy spirits? Is this goose worth more than the lifetime pension of Lady Agatha? In a twist worthy of any bardic tale, the gooey egg turns out to be the savior, as everyone gathered frantically slurps down additional helpings of stew in the hopes of outracing their own impending slumber. Soon enough, inspired by the goose's boldness, the knights begin to polish off their food with renewed vigor, and every man survives the night, though some do awaken wondering why they smell like mashed potatoes or vaguely of goat. So the lesson here? Always eat your supper quickly, lest you accidentally invite the spirit of an animal to keep you company on your journey of slumber. Better to fortify with sauce than curse with sloth. Picture this: a moonlit night somewhere around the year 1450. The place? England, where the air is alive with the fragrant odor of freshly baked bread mixed with the unmistakable scent of despair. You hear the sounds of crickets chirping, but there's also a faint trace of people whispering, because apparently, in medieval times, sleep was as coveted as fine wine and a good pair of boots. The central figure of this tale is none other than Sir Reginald the Restless, a nobleman who, as rumors had it, was sleep-deprived to the point where he'd begun mistaking his trusty horse for a pillow. Sir Reginald had heard whispers in the wind, literal whispers, mind you, about a legendary sleeping draught that could induce slumber so profound it would make hibernating bears look like jittery squirrels. That enchanted elixir, they said, was made from a special blend, an ignoble concoction of local chamomile, the finest sleepy-time herbs, and a sprinkle of cow droppings. Perfectly normal in medieval society, where nothing screams high society like a good bit of dung in your tea. On this particular night, Sir Reginald sat in his dimly lit chamber, surrounded by tapestries depicting his ancestors engaged in various phases of suffocating boredom. He was joined by his loyal servant, young Timmy, who alternated between stifling yawns and checking for potential fainting horses. As Sir Reginald drank from the overly decorated goblet, a design so ostentatious it had its own fans, he began to melt into the pillow, succumbing to the blissful coma everyone had raved about. Ah, the stillness, the tranquility, the slight paranoia that came from being the only nobleman who couldn't tell sheep from peasants. But wait, what was that? A devious plot brews as the local chamberpot thief, known only as the shit-stirrer, revealed his dastardly scheme to steal the dreams of nobility, a side hustle so absurd it was practically guaranteed to leave everyone confused. Rather than robbing them of coins, he would pilfer their dreams using a bugle made from reclaimed toilet bowls, since who wouldn't believe a man with impeccable plumbing skills would have the talent to extract dreams? The shit-stirrer was ready to harvest the sweet, sweet dreams of sleeping nobility and sell them off to worried merchants desperate to know if they'd finally win the next pig-wheeling contest. As dawn broke, poor young Timmy stood guard, completely oblivious that the shit-stirrer was sneaking in, stealthily transforming the night into an absurd heist befitting a bad sitcom. Just as the shit-stirrer was about to strike, he bumped into a cow. Yes, the very same cow that had apparently escaped from the pasture, armed with the knowledge of how to make a ruckus of a lifetime. In a twist of fate straight out of a comedy, the cow began mooing ferociously, waking Sir Reginald from his golden slumber. Startled and alarmed, he leapt from his bed, toppling over his beloved goblet and spilling dream elixir all over the floor. The shit-stirrer froze, terrified of facing the wrath of a nobleman with awareness and a cow on the defensive. The ensuing chaos led to a bizarre standoff between Sir Reginald, young Timmy, and the now very vocal cow. In a triumphant moment that will forever change history, Sir Reginald declared, "Let him have the dreams. Give that fool 20 of my cows, but guard my sleep with the ferocity of 1,000 knights." This ridiculous agreement brokered the world's first and only sleep-sharing program, ensuring that noblemen could snooze in peace while peasants competed in dreaming contests sponsored by the shit-stirrer, with prizes including, surprisingly, more cows. And thus, the next time you think your nighttime slumbers can be stolen, remember the day sleep became a commodity fought over with less dignity than a pig's race. So, what did we learn? Never underestimate the power of a cow or a mediocre thief in a quest for sweet dreams. Picture this. The year is 1347, and our sleepy set is rural England. A full moon hangs in the sky like an ominous eye, peeking through clouds that smell faintly of damp hay and last week's cabbage. The air is filled with the cacophony of snoring peasants, an orchestra conducted by the very real fear of the Black Death tumbling over them like a wayward thunderstorm. Enter our protagonist, Edric, a farmer who has just eaten a royal feast of turnips and sorrow, uncomfortably wedged between two snoring neighbors who are somewhere between a boar and a chainsaw in their nighttime symphonies. The walls of his mud-brick home groan and creak more than the floorboards of a haunted castle, and the candlelight flickers like it's auditioning for a horror film. Now, in this time, sleep was less about resting and more about playing Russian roulette with your mental state. Peasants would often fall asleep clutching their wooden crosses, convinced that demons were playing hide and seek right outside their windows. And, of course, they weren't exactly wrong. Medieval superstition crowded the nights, fear taking on a life of its own. Edric had heard tales of incubus and succubus visiting folks in the dead of night, even worse than the horrible neighbor with the perpetual garlic breath. As Edric dives deep into a fit of slumber, the sounds of his village's midnight panic elevate, livestock clattering in the pens, women wielding rolling pins ready to battle imaginary witches. And here is Edric, trapped in the chaos of his own mind. The darkness is punctured by flashes of night terrors, visions of corn husks dancing the twist while leering specters taunted him for last week's failed harvest. And then, just when you think it couldn't get any weirder, Edric jolts awake to discover he's still breathing. But, oh no, there's a dilemma. He forgot the sacred ritual of anti-dreaming. You see, the peasants had developed quirky remedies for bad dreams, ranging from garlic strings hung overhead to sleeping with their shoes on inside out, an act guaranteed to confuse any lurking nightmares into fleeing. And did it work? Well, that's open for debate. But just as the peaceful recitation of Mary had a little lamb, which had subsequently morphed into a medieval chant, was about to lull Edric into a safe sleep. A cow outside lets out an extraordinary moan that sounds suspiciously like the final act of a melodrama. It sends Edric back into dreamland, tail-spinning uncontrollably into an abyss of bubbling cauldrons and menacing vegetables demanding tribute. At the height of this midnight crisis, a breakthrough moment arrives. When an unfortunate mosquito bites him on the ear, he swats it away and instead grabs the closest weapon. No, not a sword, but a pillow, a medieval weapon of mass slumber. With that, he launches an offensive pillow jab into the air, which promptly knocks over a carefully stacked pile of hay, leading to a full-circle moment of bedlam and chaos as his entire village awakens in a chorus of clatter and confused yelps. As neighbors spill into the night, ready to find the responsible parties for this peak absurdity, Edric finds himself standing amidst the chaos, still victorious, yet utterly confused. He learns that perhaps the best way to vanquish nightmares isn't potions or incantations. No, it's simply causing such a ruckus that sleep becomes a shared endeavor of chaos. And the moral of the story? In the good old days, sleep was best found in community disturbances. The louder, the better. So next time you're battling nighttime terrors, find a friend, wake the whole neighborhood. Together, your snores can become an epic symphony of absurdity. Welcome to the enchanting world of medieval naptime, where sleep wasn't just an escape, it was a deeply ritualistic affair, drenched in absurdity and superstition. The time? A crisp evening in 12th century France, under the glow of tallow candles as they flicker like a clueless moth trying to escape its inevitable doom. The air is thick with the musty smell of woolen blankets and the somewhat less inviting odor of unwashed peasants who believe bathing is a sin. Our setting? A twinkling castle, a fortress of questionable hygiene and more quirky rules than a modern-day reality show. Gathered in the great hall, we find Sir Reginald the Restless, a man whose noble lineage was only matched by his passion for unapproved dozing. His hair, a wild mop of unkempt curls, suggests he's just rolled out of nowhere, possibly even a haystack, giving new meaning to the term Sleeping Beauty. Tonight's menu? A delightful feast specially crafted to prepare nobles for what was lovingly referred to as the midnight snooze. This culinary creation included roasted boar, wild herbs, and enough wine to knock a horse unconscious. However, what made this dinner surreally hilarious was the critical component that every noble was expected to consume: a handful of somnolent seeds, known to bring on the most delectable drowsiness. But then enter the feast's main event, the aged tub of mystery, formerly known as the sleepy soup. Sebastian, the castle's cook whose culinary skills were a joke even among jesters, had summoned all sorts of questionable ingredients into a pot. Kale, the villain of every medieval meal, fish eyes just to keep things interesting, and a splash of the dreaded nocturnal nectar, an unhinged mix of fermented honey and herbs purchased from a suspicious traveling merchant with an eye patch, and stories that made even the bravest knight shiver. Now, before diving into this delightful madness, the nobles had to undergo the sleep ritual to ward off evil spirits. They would circle the table 3 times, chant a convoluted series of prayers that often included mentions of vegetables, and wear hats made of cabbage leaves, because obviously nothing says state of relaxation quite like an agricultural accessory. As they slurped down the sleepy soup, Sir Reginald was suddenly struck by an immense fear. What if the soup had been cursed? What if the recipe involved dark magic, turning them all into mice? Panic rose like yeast in poorly baked bread. "The mice will invade our dreams," he exclaimed, causing the nobleman to pause, soup spoons hovering perilously over the bubbling mess. "Cue the chaos." A loyal servant darted forth, claiming to have seen a rat scuttle across the soup pot, sending visions of a culinary coup rushing through their minds. What if it was a rat that had lived through the plague? The nobles gasped in unison, as one shriek echoed through the hall like a poorly timed orchestral note. Just when it seemed chaos would ensue, a wise old bard interrupted with a wry grin. He explained, "Fear not, Lord Reginald. We shall simply change the focus of our ritual. Instead of fretting about the contents of our broth, let us do the only logical thing. Sing to it." With a bewildered look, the nobles burst into an off-tune serenade, chanting rhymes about the therapeutic virtues of cucumbers and the glories of naps. As the hilarity unfolded, the perspective shifted. Sir Reginald, now donning a cabbage hat so stylish it could start a trend, suddenly found the soup painfully unimportant. The power of ridiculousness engulfed the room, their worries dissolving faster than their midnight snooze. The final twist? Post-soup consumption, the entire group fell into a deep and unexpectedly serene sleep, cabbage hats and all, leaving behind the lingering scent of brewed madness. And the lesson here, dear viewers? never overlook the power of nonsense in the pursuit of dreamland, especially when served with a dollop of questionable soup. Picture this. It's 1348 in a damp, dreary corner of medieval England. The moon hangs low, casting a ghostly glow over the cobblestone streets, illuminated only by the flickering torchlight of a guard who hasn't slept since Tuesday, which, by medieval standards, was 3 lifetimes ago. And what are these poor souls doing? Patrolling the darkness for lurking miscreants, or worse, over-aggressive hedgehogs. The atmosphere is thick with the aroma of sooty, burnt mutton and an air that smells suspiciously of anxiety, mixed with the ever-present scent of impending doom. The sounds? A symphony of distant howls, occasional livestock squawking about something called freedom, and guards screaming at shadows as they practice their battle cries in hopes of terrifying away the evening's existential dread. Enter our key character, Sir Reginald the really not-so-bright, a chubby guard who has confused his armor with a walking burrito. He's been up for nights fueled solely by festering paranoia and the occasional draught of cheap mead. You see, back in these times, folks believed that it was all hands on deck for a night of patrolling, lest the English countryside be mysteriously invaded by the Ballad of Broken Windows. The horrible threat of petty vandalism at night. Tension soars like a poorly thrown javelin when Lady Muriel, also known as the village's most hot-tempered goat-herder, marches out of the shadows while hurling accusations about nocturnal knife-wielding evildoers who simply want to chop her beloved goats into pies. Meanwhile, Reginald, overwhelmed by the mounting pressure, devises an absurd plan involving a giant metal goose decoy. Apparently, that's how you stop thieves, by terrifying them with vivid nightmares of poultry. Hilarity ensues as Reginald, with no hope of any rational thought, struggles to construct this monstrous avian nightmare. In his inertia, he accidentally knocks over a barrel of stale ale, leading to a waterfall of sickly sweet destruction. The art of drunken invention is a harebrained recipe to zap fear into the hearts of thieves. Or was it to attract them? Either way, they would have some new and unexpected guests to deal with. As fate would have it, at the height of his panic and inebriated creative endeavor, a small band of local ruffians, an oddly friendly group of thieves who had come to commandeer the goat instead, steal the metal goose right from under Reginald's nose. With laughter echoing through the dark, it becomes painfully clear that no one takes the night watch seriously anymore. With the ruffians prancing off upon their new prize, Reginald wakes up, quite literally, to his worst nightmare, and realizes he'd forgotten to collect story time for the village, the terrible tales he'd sworn to provide when the sun rose. Turns out, the village was much more frightened of his butt-wobbling goose than they were of real thieves. In the end, Sir Reginald learns a valuable lesson indeed. Always sleep with one eye open. You never know when a metal goose might leave you powerless and embarrassed. And so it was declared. The only thing more dangerous than a sleepless night was a drunken plan executed while watching the clouds, waiting for mischief. So remember, when in doubt, just blame it on the nighttime ruffians. They're definitely not out for a snack. Picture this. The year is 1492, a year notable for more than just Columbus setting sail to scrounge up some land and become the world's most overrated travel agent. Our scene is set in a dimly lit Welsh castle, where the barely functional fireplace crackles in a way that suggests both warmth and certain doom. The air? A melange of roasted boar, damp stone, and that unmistakable tang of regret. Courtesy of the castle's last banquet, which absolutely no one talked about afterwards. Enter our protagonist, Lord Gerald of Snorecastle, whose nobility is overshadowed only by his renowned ability to persistently wallow in tedium and excessively question if that third slice of pie was indeed necessary. He sits up in his heavy, ornately carved bed, drowsy yet unnervingly hungry, in a fully furnished room where the scent of opportunity is laced with a slight whiff of, you guessed it, pigs. You see, in this medieval wonderland, where sleep is frequently interrupted by outside forces ranging from raiding Vikings to rampaging local boars, the midnight snack often comprised something between dimly regarded leftovers or an outright health hazard. But tonight, Lord Gerald has his heart and stomach set on something else. A genuine Welsh delicacy deep-fried in a deadly amount of nostalgia, and possibly some last-minute pig's blood. Blood pudding, to be precise. The ritual surrounding this quirky dish? A veritable blend of superstition and procrastination, involving elaborate prayers recited in languages no one quite understands, alongside nervous pacing by the pantry, where loyal squires and possibly a terrified goat are stationed, clutching a ladle like it's their last stronghold of sanity. The night guards gossip about court politics and dust bunnies while the sounds of distant hounds yelp throughout the castle, spurring wild thoughts that perhaps Lord Gerald's druidic ancestors are conspiring for him to die in, of all things, diet-induced embarrassment. As he begins the very scientific process of rummaging through various jars filled with what can only be described as questionable contents, we start to sense the rising absurdity of his plight. Each jar proudly labeled with names like surprisingly edible, and the less confident, keep out for your own good. Finally, Lord Gerald lays eyes on the sacred yet notorious blood pudding, lustrous and gleaming under the flickering torchlight, like it holds the potential to fulfill his every gastronomical fantasy, or send him spiraling into medieval purgatory. Taking a deep breath, he thinks, what's the worst that could happen? With peasant-like audacity, he digs in. Moments later, disaster strikes. The sound of squawking alerts the guards, who rush in to find Gerald in a fit of existential crisis, clutching his stomach whilst simultaneously composing a sonnet to the meal that may betray him. In the panic, the servants stumble over each other, and the goat makes a break for it, creating a motion picture perfect scene of medieval madness. It turns out, another serving of luscious blood pudding was the very last thing he needed when all his life choices were already on the brink of collapse. Delivering a comic twist to an otherwise pedestrian evening, an actually noble knight enters, oddly calm, and discovers Gerald hunched over, proclaiming that he has been poisoned. The knight, used to the more elegant affairs of warfare, scoffs and takes a medicinal swig from his flask, then gracefully declares, "Ah, Lord Gerald, it appears your midnight snack has evoked the medieval diet of despair." Real historical fact check. Blood pudding dates back centuries and was considered a nutritious, adventurous treat, much like today's Instagram influencers promoting kale. Who knew that dread and delight could coexist so comfortably on a plate? So here's the takeaway. If you find yourself at a medieval feast and someone offers you an unidentifiable delicacy, Just remember, sometimes the snack of dreams is also the snack of horror. Embrace the chaos on your plate. You could always blame the goat. Q. The eerie music of the time. In the year of our Lord, 1225, we find ourselves at the outskirts of the thriving metropolis of Crankensettle, a town so rife with superstition and, let's be honest, really bad smells that locals believed that most any dish served after sunset could hold the powers of black magic. The date? An evening festive gathering, the esteemed midnight snack of the feasters, or, as the town calls it, the last supper of the gluttonous. Lights dimmed, torches flickering like a bad audition for a candle. The smell of rotting cabbage wafting through the air mingled with the faint undercurrent of distractingly suspicious baked apple pie. Then there's our protagonist, Sir Reginald of Crumbcake, a man so obsessed with the culinary treasures of the kingdom that he once declared that if it could be eaten, it should be celebrated. Alongside him are his merry band of feasting knights, each adorned not with armor, but with belly bulges that could rival the great hills of Crankensettle. The food? Ah yes, the pièce de résistance, a jovial pot of mystery stew, the likes of which haven't been seen since the last visible spectrum of good hygiene disappeared into the mists of time. No one knew what exactly was in it. Rumor ranged from meat fell off a carriage to an adventurous chicken who had long ago run afoul of the law and lived to tell the tale. However, one ingredient that seemed in most abundance was an unidentifiable cloud of skepticism. As Sir Reginald dipped his ladle into the bubbling cauldron, superstitions floated to the surface like rafts of despair. It was said, in whispers so quiet they could only be heard if one was listening hard enough, that certain ingredients might turn men into women, or women into something decidedly less pleasant. Some believed the apples were put there by witches seeking revenge for every bad joke about pies made at their expense, while others lived in paralyzing fear that consuming an undercooked potato could summon the potato demon of Crankensettle, a malevolent spirit whose only goal was to turn all men bald in their slumber. As each night took their turn, they shared exaggerated tales of loss about previous feasts gone wrong, burnt mutton, infernal salads, and even the scariest of all, the exploding turnip incident of 22. Soon, chatter turned into anxious laughs, and even the floorboards seemed to creak with intrigue. Or was that a cleverly disguised potato demon shimmying just beneath them? With every clink of the stewpot stirring, Sir Reginald raised his voice, claiming this midnight madness would mark a new culinary tradition of a snack bar where no dish could ever be guaranteed to be either very good or very bad. The stakes were immense, and irresistibly, the clattering of spoons signaled the knights to dig in, but not before a ritualized prayer. May our hearts be light and our stomachs be tight, and if you feel a lightning bolt, know that your stew was polite. Amidst the revelry, then came an unexpected twist. As each knight lifted their bowls for the first taste, a loud rumble roared from deep within the stew. A gigantic, greasy eel surfaced, oddly reminiscent of the local tavern keeper's latest haircut. Gasps ensued, the kind you usually reserve for public staring contests or engineering disasters. But alas, the eel, named Sir Slippy, was evidently the key to diffusing the stress of too much food combined with too many ridiculous superstitions. Instead of the chaos and calamity predicted by malignant overconsumption, laughter erupted. Sir Slippy became the new mascot for the midnight snack of the feasters, as every night gingerly nibbled in peace beneath the flickering lights. The stress of culinary anxiety was whisked away with each joyful slurp, reminding all that sometimes laughter is the best answer to whatever gruesome culinary disaster lands in your lap. But what can we glean from this fluffy escapade? The moral is clear. Beyond every simmering pot lies the possibility of culinary calamity that can somehow ooze into a piping hot lesson about camaraderie, and maybe a slippery eel or two. Cue the gentle clinking of nighttime bells and the hum of a low-flying owl on a warm evening in 1230. Welcome to medieval England, where the air is thick with a cocktail of straw, sewage, and the general stench of your neighbor's unwashed linens. Picture this: a young peasant named Ethelred, who, as luck would have it, is suffering from insomnia, which in the 13th century is quite the conversation starter in the local tavern. Now, Ethelred resides in a one-room hovel that doubles as both home and barn. The walls are as decorated as your average artist's sketchbook, minus the actual art. Inside, our protagonist is surrounded by the unmistakable sounds of snoring livestock, a creaking roof that seems to be one sneeze away from collapse, and the faint whispers of his dreams completely absent. But Ethelred has a cunning plan. As the sun sets and the night's eerie embrace looms over the land, he prepares for what he believes is a revolutionary sleep experiment. A warm, cozy sack filled with aromatic herbs, believed to keep the nightmares at bay. Unbeknownst to him, it's also a buffet for the realm's most infamous rodent, the medieval rat. The stage is set, with Ethelred curling up in his straw-filled cot, the aisles illuminated by the flickering flame of a candle that's seen better days and more than a few tiny fights with wax. Meanwhile, a particularly plump rat named Reginald is preparing for his nightly frolic. And it isn't just a playdate. Reginald has a reputation to uphold as the best accidental alarm clock of the time. As the clock strikes 2, aka the witching hour where all logic and social decorum take a vacation, Ethelred finds himself whispering sweet nothings to the idea of sleep, while surrounded by the scent of chamomile from his herb sack. But lo and behold, Reginald crashes the party with the grace of a Jenga tower. As the fat beast snuffles his way into Ethelred's cozy herb sack, he unwittingly shifts the sleep dynamic from peaceful slumber to horror movie. The darkness of the night turns into chaos as Ethelred wakes up to a fur-coated intruder nibbling on his coveted dreams. Joke's on him. Little does Ethelred know, this is just a prelude to the greater calamity. Going by the social conventions of the time, where a single rat sighting could spark debates about witchcraft, Ethelred's dreams of sweet sleep are swiftly replaced by visions of getting burned at the stake. Tension stirs as our unassuming hero attempts to shoo Reginald off, which only leads to a slapstick series of misadventures involving leaping off the bed, tripping over a trough, and awakening an entire hen house. The hens, not too amused at being wakened from their slumber, decide to join the fun, launching into a cacophony of clucks that, if anything, could be mistaken for a rock concert gone rogue. Meanwhile, the rat simply smiles his little rodent smile, clearly enjoying the chaos he's created. Finally, after what feels like an eternity of madness, Ethelred catches sight of his trusty broomstick, the one tool guaranteed to wage warfare against both pests and the opinions of judgmental neighbors. With determination, he strikes like a knight of yore, managing to send Reginald flying into the night, burping up a sprig of thyme as a parting gift. As tranquility once again graces Ethelred's abode, he flops down onto his bed, utterly exhausted, and falls into a deep, dreamless sleep. But wait. Faint sounds of a familiar rustle return, and Ethelred, ever the optimist, smirks as he thinks, perhaps it was all just a bad dream. But no, history says hell have nightmares of regal rats for nights to come, because nothing says restful night quite like sleeping with a tail-waving, grain-munching creature of mischief. So what did we learn? Well, it's simple. In the Middle Ages, rats were the original sleep disruptors. Forget your fancy white noise machines, and always beware of herbal bedding. Picture this. Centuries ago, the elite of medieval Europe were preoccupied not with Netflix or TikTok, but with preparing for a night's rest worthy of royalty. The year is 1347. The place is a lavish castle in England, and the scent wafting through the air is an alluring mix of sweat, horse manure, and, naturally, lavender, because nothing says a good night's sleep like being knocked unconscious by the floral undertones of plague. As the sun dips below the horizon, bringing with it the relentless glow of judgment from the heavens, we meet our key players. Lord Borrington Pompous III, whose title actually means most likely to convoke a boring feast, and Lady Snooze-a-lot, famed for her prowess in achieving unconsciousness in less than 3 minutes. As they prepare for bed, the grand hall is illuminated by flickering candles like a scene from a horror film, with shadows creeping menacingly across the walls, accentuating the tumultuous struggle between luxurious sleep and the very real fear of being abducted by grumpy ghosts. Now, allow us to set the stage further. The floor is laden with hay, yes, hay, which not only catches the refuse of the evening feasts, but doubles as bedding, naturally promoting an intimate connection with both nature and disease. The air is punctuated with the occasional snoring of a chamberlain who doubles as a security guard, and the booming whispers of the servants discussing whose turn it is to coax the ungrateful dogs into their own ornate beds. But the real ritual begins with the nightcap, or should we say, the night kick you in the teeth. Instead of a soothing glass of warm milk, the couple indulges in a peculiar concoction of mulled wine spiced with a generous helping of nutmeg, which, believe it or not, was once believed to induce vivid hallucinations. Visions of knights and dragons. Psychedelic dreamscapes that would make even the most seasoned trippers concerned. All the while, Lady Snooze-a-lot mutters a mantra to ward off any female ghosts with unfinished business, because obviously, not every ghost wants to come back and chill. As the wine takes effect, the couple prepares for their actual bedtime. This involves not only pulling back their embroidered and bedbug-infested thatched mattresses, but also aligning their bodies facing east, because, apparently, the sun rises better if you sleep in its direction. Caged birds, an homage to their wealth, trill maddeningly in the background, their melodies providing an unsettling backdrop to what one might less charitably call hypnagogic hallucinations. Yet the real kicker in this nighttime ritual is when they engage in the beloved pastime of nightly incantations, a special blessing chanted by Lady Snooze-a-lot, directed at the nested stuffed toys which, beneath all that embroidery, are just empty sacs for insect larvae. May you keep the bedbugs away and allow me sweet dreams, she declares, undoubtedly hoping the deities are taking notes about the futility of stocking up on overpriced pillows. In a twist few could predict, this peaceful slumber ritual transforms into something more sinister when Lord Pompous III surprised Lady Snooze-a-lot by accidentally waking up half the servants when he fell into a deep, unguided snore. Amid the chaos, it turns out he had been dreaming not of glorious battles or thrilling adventures, but of potato sack races from his childhood. His muffled proclamations prompted an unruly stampede of maidservants, attempting to beat the lord awake, only to find Lady Snooze-a-lot snoring louder than a runaway wagon. Eventually, onlookers discover that Pompous III's muddled slumbering only served as an amusing disclaimer to their bizarre bedtime ritual. Ultimately, the couple ended up oversleeping and missing the grand medieval festival they had been looking forward to for months, all over nightcap hallucinations and incantations about stuffed animals. And so, what lesson do we glean from this strange tale? Rest is essential, but perhaps avoid multitasking with nocturnal incantations unless you want to accidentally enter the dividing line between insomnia and potato sack races. Welcome to the 11th century, a period where the stars did not shine as brightly as the smell of unwashed bodies and sheep. Picture this: a dimly lit room in a musty monastery, where monks are in varying states of wakefulness and the air is saturated with the reek of boiled cabbage and existential dread. Here we have Brother Thomas, who is not only an aspiring saint, but quite possibly the first medieval trendsetter to turn a complete sleep disaster into a form of spiritual practice. He is nestled snugly in a shabby straw bed lined with the softest wool his meager income could afford. A true sign of luxury back then. Sleep, for Thomas, was more than just an inconvenient nightly affair. It was a battle. A battle fought against the wild dreams induced by year-old cheese and the constant paranoia that the devil himself might be sneaking in for a midnight snack. As night falls, the sounds of crickets perform their serenade, amplified by the occasional snore from unsuspecting monks who simply cannot hold back their enthusiasm for deep medieval anxieties. The ambiance? A blend of faint flickering candlelight casting ominous shadows, the musky odor of wool, and unidentifiable food remnants stuck in the corners of the room like forgotten regrets. But it's not just the bed and brothers that make this a spectacle, it's the sleep rituals. Picture Brother Thomas standing proudly, clenching a piece of sheep wool and chanting, "May the fuzzies shield me from the nightmares of taxation and piety." Next to him, another monk secretly sprinkles sheep dung around for luck. Because why not? It's medieval England. Anything might help you keep the devil at bay and ensure dreams of far-off lands instead of tax collectors. As the hours tick by, an unusual competition brews. Brother Bernard, a self-proclaimed sleep scientist, read, "Not at all claims that wrapping oneself in the magical wool of the humble sheep elevates sleep quality and offers visions of holiness." As he rolls into a wool-wrapped burrito, the room watches, not in awe, but rather pressing their lips together to stifle laughter, the work of a holy man or the absurdity of a wool-loving fool. The tension rises when Brother Thomas, frustrated by the weirdness and lack of sleep, challenges Bernard's woolly supremacy. "I'll prove my actual slumber enhances divine enlightenment," he proclaims, only to awkwardly slide into slumber on a haystack, sealing his fate for a night of questionable dreams. And sure enough, as dawn breaks, not a soul is any the wiser, except Bernard, who ends up embracing his midnight sheep snuggles as the supposed new way to achieve nirvana. In a twist of faith, Thomas awakens to discover he had dreamt of knitting patterns for a new divine vestment, an embarrassing risk for a holy man. Despite his exploits, he now found himself the talk of the monastery, his blunders echoing louder than the hymn of praise for even the sheep. As for the lesson in this smelly saga of wool and woe, it elucidates that in the grand quest for divine sleep, one might just end up tangled in ridiculousness. Divine intervention? More like divine confusion, all thanks to the wrath of wool. So remember, if you ever find yourself pondering your sleep routine, just ask yourself, am I truly ready to embrace the complex ins and outs of sheep's wool as my evening's grace? Picture this. The year is 1190, and deep within Sherwood Forest, where even the squirrels carry swords, a raucous band of merry men are preparing for a feast. The forest is drenched in moonlight, casting eerie shadows, while the air smells of roasted venison, pine needles, and a hefty dose of reckless endangerment. Enter Robin Hood and his loyal band, gathered around an enormous bonfire, ready to devour a delectable spread that could inspire envy in any Michelin-starred chef. Or perhaps not. After all, the main dish is probably a dubious stew made from dubious ingredients that may or may not include last week's roadkill. Tension fills the air as Robin, clad in his infamous green tights, a bold fashion choice when your enemies are armed with crossbows, prepares the meal with a seriousness that can only be rivaled by a contestant on a cooking show facing elimination. You see, in their world, food wasn't merely sustenance, it was the toy gun in a long-standing game of survival. As they carve up the meat, wary eyes glance skyward. To feast is to invite fate's scrutiny. After all, what if the merry men were too merry? What if their laughter attracted not only the praises of the forest, but also the sharp arrows of the Sheriff of Nottingham? As the group digs into their stew, a ruckus from the trees begins, rustling, snapping branches, and the faint sound of fanged creatures realizing that these men are sitting on a banquet they didn't sign up for. Was that a growl? Or just a drunk Friar Tuck struggling to get his third helping? Tension escalates, accompanied by the auditory backdrop of a loose-stringed lute, where Will Scarlet, ever the dramatist, attempts to keep spirits high through song. To him, the tale of an errant bear has all the makings of an epic tragedy, and to anyone else, a very good reason to eat faster. Just as Robin is preparing a grand speech about living freely and life beyond serfdom, images of glorious rebellion dancing in his head, a noise erupts from the underbrush. Burst of snorts, clattering hooves, and wild-eyed boars charge into the clearing. Just as the merry men draw their swords, Robin sings out, "Stay calm, lads. They can always join us night hunting." Here's the kicker. The boars don't mind their intruder status at all. Apparently, this was not an uprising of animal rights activists, but merely a communal dinner crash. Within moments, the legendary outlaw and his crew find themselves locked in a comedic battle against woodland creatures over dinner rights. Imagine the scene. Men ducking away from tusks while trying to protect their stew pots, reasoning that they're not even against killing boars until they realize one of the wild animals is trying to steal Will's loot. After a comically disastrous scuffle, one overly enthusiastic swipe of a sword here, an accidental fumble of stew there, the merry men somehow manage to scare the boars off, sending them scattering in the opposite direction, likely mumbling their own version of medieval curses. As the fog of hilarity clears, Robin stands covered in potatoes and nearly ribald stew, staring incredulously at his inebriated band of brothers who, while battling for nightly sustenance, had forgotten the true enemies of the crown all that time were not the sheriff but their own careless appetites. And thus, amid the smoldering embers and scattered food remnants, Robin declared, "A feast like no other. We have defeated fearsome beasts, and perhaps lost to lunch." Moral of the story: when it comes to feasts, it's clearly not about who's in charge, but about who gets to the pot first. And never underestimate a boar's appetite in the world of merry men. In a dimly lit room, sometime in the 15th century, nestled deep within a castle that smelled faintly of unwashed peasants and burnt oat porridge, we find ourselves at the heart of a medieval nap revolution. Picture this. The year is 1347, and across Europe, people are preoccupied with one thing: sleeping. Not ordinary sleeping, mind you, but gloriously excessive napping, heralded by none other than the Council of Naptistry, a highly influential group whose motto was, "Fortune favors the snoozers." The air is thick with the scent of stale ale, and faint snores echo through the stone corridors, harmonizing with a chorus of drunk knights trying to sing about their conquests over a game of cards. Here lies our hero, Sir Lancelot the Lazy, a knight so devoted to sleep that he insisted on wearing a nightcap perpetually, even in battle. His gleaming armor became an improbable showpiece for nap-inspired fashion. Who knew that crested helmets double as comfy pillows? Now let's get into the peculiarities of their sleep habits. Enter festive banquets of rich food designed not to nourish, but to fuel the need for serious nap time. Course after course were served with reckless abandon. There were roasts large enough to feed an entire village, gravy pools worthy of swimming, and desserts practically oozing from the weight of sugar. After indulging, the only thing on everyone's mind was the question: why stay awake when there's an abundance of floor space just waiting to cradle your postprandial snooze? In the centerpiece of this peculiar culture was the practice of strategic napping, specifically timed to dodge the wrath of cranky overlords. Knights who napped well were known to dominate battlefields, their opponents perplexed by their tendency to suddenly doze off mid-sword fight, only to rise refreshed and bewildering, ready to skewer the competition in a series of bewildering nap attacks. But, as with all utopian societies, things were not without their odd superstitions. It was said that a poorly timed nap could summon the wrath of the Sandman, a mythical figure who would unleash nightmares featuring poorly constructed castles and mysteriously vanishing socks. Tales circulated of unfortunate souls who once slept too long and woke up in the midst of a total hoof-and-mouth pandemic, the medieval equivalent of waking up 10 years late for a conference call. So what really kept our knights and maidens awake during the day? Rumors swept through the realm like wildfire that the king's new sleep-induced anabolic potion was laced with sneak peeks of future taxes. After all, nothing says stay awake quite like the thought of your lands being grievously overtaxed. The authorities went as far as launching an investigation into gourmet sleeping potions. The potion makers accused each other of using nothing but kitchen leftovers and excess drowsiness. Here's the twist. After weeks of surveillance, the highest-ranking chancellor decreed, "No more potions, let them sleep until the cows sing," and curbed the popular suspicion. Officially decreed by the crown, the Knights of the Nap were celebrated with a week of nightly siestas, yielding surprising productivity in conquering new lands, if only in their dreams. So, what's our punchline here? While Sir Lancelot may have often been caught mid-yawn on the battlefield, perhaps we've all learned a valuable lesson. In the chaos of life, a well-timed nap can reignite that spark of ambition, or, at the very least, alleviate the crushing weight of the day's boredom. Welcome to the illustrious year of 1312, where the dust motes of time form an airborne tapestry of ennui. The setting? A dark, cramped village tavern in the heart of medieval England, where the tavern keeper proudly displays his collection of slightly suspicious meats. Tonight's hero? The not-so-humble snooze. The air is thick with the glorious aroma of overcooked meat, rancid beer, and, just for contrast, an earthy whiff of unwashed peasant. Lanterns flicker as if in a desperate need for a coffee break, and the sounds of clinking tankards blend with deep, content snoring, creating an ambiance that screams, "Welcome to the land of eternal naps." Meet our central character, Sir Snorri-Allot, a knight whose only battles involve avoiding sunlight and the pressures of actually achieving anything during daylight hours. It's been said that he can nap through the thunderous roars of local dragons, which really says more about medieval dragons than anyone is comfortable admitting. So, Sir Snorri-Allot enters the tavern, proudly boasting his latest conquest. A day spent lounging on the hay behind the stables. Pushing through the crowd, he finds his favored spot by the hearth, blissfully unaware of the strong possibility the hay was actually former bedding material for sheep. Who needs a bed anyway when you have the rugged embrace of a tavern floor? At this moment, the village's unusual obsession with napping takes center stage. Legend had it that if you napped too much during the day, your spirit would wander off during your slumber, potentially leading to a case of rogue ghostly possession. No wonder every peasant seemed to have a ghostly apparition of Uncle Bertie joining them for tea. But it doesn't stop there. As the village men and women prepare for the greatest of events, the Nap Festival, they obsess over an ancient ritual involving vast quantities of beer, mismatched socks, and surprisingly complex snoring competitions. Who knew that available pasture land could be occupied by deep sleep and rhythmic snores that often put local lullabies out of business? Sir Snorri-Allot was slated to be the champion this year. Not because he was good at snoring, but because he had a special technique involving varying pitches that some claimed could awaken sleeping dogs in nearby villages. And that's no small feat. As the locals gather, clutching tankards filled to the brim with local brews and wearing their finest sleepwear, a sight few could comprehend without experiencing existential dread, things get silly quickly. The contest begins, and the air grows thick with competition. Participants lounge back against hay bales, eyes fluttering shut, intent on snoozing their way to glory. The tavern keeper eyes them with a mix of pride and terror, because who knew that a few hours into the contest, this sleepin' Saturnalia would spiral into a hair-raising orgy of snoring that was equal parts impressive and terrifying. But as the thunderous snores clash in an unexpected crescendo, a twist interrupted the impending victory. Someone had the bright idea to toss a cattle prod into the mix, purely for a little lively fun, of course. As Sir Snorri-Alot was jolted awake mid-snooze, he let out a snore that resonated through the tavern like a foghorn gone rogue, causing an immediate blackout of sound and sending every participant tumbling to the hay. In the end, the nap festival concluded not with a victory for snoring prowess, but rather with everyone snoring together. Judges declared, "We have a tie. We are all winners in the sleep game." And no one questioned the judicial integrity of peasant life that day. Sir Snorri-Alot drifted back into his dreams. Snoring away the day's victories, the village learned an invaluable lesson. Napping is not just a habit, it's a competitive sport. So next time you feel guilty about your midday doze, just remember, there are villages out there with more pressing matters, like becoming the undisputed champions of unconsciousness. Picture this. It's the year 1360, near a castle that resembles a rather large, toilet. The lighting? Dim, of course, from a handful of sputtering torches that would make shadows appear to dance like they're auditioning for a bad Renaissance fair. The smell? A pleasant blend of damp hay, medieval sweat, and just a hint of whatever the cook scraped off the floor last week. Now the real treat of the night, well, let's hope it's a treat, is something the noble aristocrats called supper, served at an hour that would make our modern bedtimes weep in shame. In the grand dining hall, the noble Lady Edith, the epitome of grace and allergies who knew medieval dust could trigger sneezing like a plague, presides over a table that could practically qualify to be its own buffet line. Rounding out the bizarre ensemble are her 7 equally sneeze-prone children, each vying for their chance at the rotten fish. Yes, you heard that right. Roasted fish that's somehow only a few days past its prime, making it a prime candidate for what would now be a regrettable takeout option. But wait, it's not just the fish. We also have cheese that's definitely aged, as in, why is it green? And bread so stale it would probably double as medieval weaponry. The pièce de résistance? A large jug of mead, because nothing says proper nutrition like fermented honey sloshing around in your belly, risking a yeast infection. As the family gathers and considers their options, the tension rises, mostly because no one dares be the first to sample the fish. Will Lady Edith's gastrointestinal fate lie in the hands of her mischievous children? The elder son, Edgar, devises an elaborate scheme involving their pet goat, who at this point only wants to chew the tablecloth and camp in a compost heap. In the midst of this culinary catastrophe, local superstitions rear their absurd heads. It's said that if you don't eat your food while standing on one leg, the spirits of spoiled meats past will plague your digestive tract for eternity. So naturally, as Lady Edith attempts to balance awkwardly while dishing up fragments of crusty bread, her children cheer her on like they're at an odd medieval Olympics event. But just when it seems the fish might be a lost cause, a sudden twist occurs. Lady Edith's eldest, Edgar, inexplicably declares a piety oath against the so-called cursed fish, insisting his mother should take the first bite to absolve them all from potential food poisoning. With all eyes upon her, Lady Edith, sensing the weight of her family's fate, plucks a helpless morsel from the plate. raises it to the heavens in an awkward gesture, which, frankly, could qualify for a hand signal to the spirits condemning their dinner choices. In an unexpected turn, rather than dramatic gasps and imminent doom, her bite of the fish releases a cloud of dissolving greediness, transforming into a magnificent banquet-worthy platter that defies all previous staining incidents. As it turns out, the fish is merely the medieval equivalent of a fine wine at a romantic dinner. Or was it just the mead talking? What we learn from this historical fiasco? It's clear that superstition and the questionable state of food can lead to moments of sheer irony, or at least a good laugh. So remember, never underestimate the power of medieval dinner table theatrics, or the potential backfire of snacking on fish past its expiration date. Picture this. It's the 12th century, and you find yourself in a drafty medieval castle, complete with moats, drafts, and a distinct aroma that can only be described as wet hay meets questionable hygiene. The sun is setting, casting an ominous glow across a dining room table laden with food that would make today's Instagram influencers weep. Among the questionable delicacies rests a massive pot of oatmeal, sludgy and suspiciously steaming. But wait, this isn't breakfast. It's the main attraction of dinner. Enter Sir Roland of the Stout Stomach, a nobleman known not just for his impressive girth but also his profound love of everything grainy and bland. As he approaches the table, whispers of treachery swirl through the air like a favored medieval perfume, a swirl of dirt, mildew, and oats gone rogue. Now, amidst the smell of burnt bread and overcooked cabbage, something wicked this way comes. The parchment scrolls, known to mere mortals as recipes, are actually written in blood from disgruntled cooks. The nonsensical rituals surrounding this very bowl of oatmeal indicates high stakes. It's not just a matter of taste, but potentially life and death. In this world, the juicy gossip among kitchen staff included evil curses, wild oats also known as entrapment oats, and the infamous "if you eat this and survive, you might be royal belief." As the laughter dies down, the kitchen staff frantically follows the vigilant cook's guidelines where, Step 1. The oatmeal must be stirred clockwise under a full moon, while swatting away persistent crows because ancient superstition. Step 2. The chef, clad in robes that have seen better days, must recite an incantation believed to ward off the revenge-seeking spirits of past oatmeal lovers, which essentially just went, "Y'all can eat this with no harm, I promise." Step 3. The crucial final step involves testing a small portion with a butter knife. If the knife bends under the weight, you're good to go. Woe betide the batch that results in the knife snapping, for it invites chaos. And what if that chaos arrives? As the servants prepare for serving time, an ominous crack splits the air. The casement window shatters. A band of, was it feral cats? Or were they Viking ghosts? Circles the feast ominously. Sir Roland, ever the brave heart, plunges his spoon into the potion of doom. Silence falls over the dining hall as he takes the first bite. The tension in the room is palpable. Onlookers hold their breath as Roland chews, the very essence of suspense hanging between each gummy mouthful. Suddenly, the light of realization dawns upon him. His face contorts not from poison, but from the sheer blandness of the dish. What is this? Happened to my fancy meat pie? The silence splinters like the broken window, and chaos descends. Everyone realizes the oatmeal is too fermented to be edible, gifting them with not just discomfort but a threat of revolt from the royals of food culture. Ladies faint. Servants drop to their knees in awe of Roland's bravery or stupidity. Somehow, the chaos resurrects the spirits of medieval dining etiquette, and every noble prepares for a mass exodus in search of salt or, heaven forbid, spicy mustard. In the end, the oatmeal is deemed the culinary rival of world history's worst betrayals. Sir Roland not only survives, but inadvertently inspires the creation of the phrase, "an oath of oats," which is still used for lamentable dining experiences to this very day. So, what do we learn here? Even oatmeal can become a dinner party hazard if prepared with medieval negligence. Remember, folks, before serving your guests, ensure that the only thing fermenting is the grapes in your wine, not the oatmeal on your table, say. Picture this. It's the year 1522, and we find ourselves in the dimly lit, rancid-smelling kitchen of a medieval English estate. The faint aroma of boiled cabbage mingles with the sharp scent of something that really shouldn't have been boiled in the first place. The atmosphere is bustling with cooks hustling about, dodging the occasional scullery maid who appears to have lost both her balance and her ambition to make it to the other side of the kitchen. In the center of this culinary chaos stands Sir Reginald Hogswallow, the lord of the manor and a connoisseur of fine meats. Lord Hogswallow, a rotund fellow with a penchant for greased mustaches and questionable hygiene, has summoned the household for a sumptuous feast. This evening's pièce de résistance, a rather dubious-looking platter of roasted peacock and something resembling pudding that might have once been alive. But wait, there's more. Alongside the peacock, sitting like an unwanted guest at a dinner party, is a side dish of boiled badger. Yes, boiled badger. Because in medieval England, nothing screamed haute cuisine quite like a dish that could potentially attack back. As the guests arrive, you can't help but notice the hushed whispers amongst them. The servants scurry about, pouring wine with a side of anxiety, and a strange sense of pending catastrophe looms in the air, making the smell of badger well less appealing than normal. Each noble's eyes dart toward the food, suspiciously contemplating if today is the day they'd rather starve than risk food poisoning. Now, the tension comes to a head as a peculiar custom unfolds. As a tradition, the food must be blessed before being consumed because then apparently, if you don't perform an incantation over your badger, it may rise from the plate demanding its dignity back. After guests chant with more zeal than accuracy, they grab their forks, which might as well be considered medieval torture devices for the amount of effort needed to stab at a robustly muscled piece of boiled badger. Just when everyone braces themselves for a sideshow of culinary disaster, Sir Reginald himself dives in first, eyes gleaming with audacity, and forks the peacock like a true gastronomical gladiator. As he brings it to his lips for the first fateful taste, tension so thick one could slice it with a blunt knife, he makes a face that could only be described as catastrophic discovery. Turns out, in a shocking plot twist, instead of grandiose flavors of spices and grandeur, he had pierced the badger instead, and the taste was reminiscent of soggy hay and unfulfilled dreams. An awkward silence befalls the table, and then suddenly a uppit cup over a rancid peacock leads to chaos resembling a medieval mosh pit, plates flying, chairs tumbling, and noblemen filing out of the room in sheer horror. The kitchen, once bustling, is now an arena for survival where one brave yardbird escapes the carnage, only to be greeted by the castle cat which has just arrived for its own dinner party. As the night closes with a victorious feline and a banquet turned battleground, one must pause to ponder the absurdity of dining in the Dark Ages. Was it a delightful feast? Not unless you consider losing your gastronomical integrity a new trend. In an age when the motto was "eat or be eaten," guests learned one timeless lesson. Sometimes it's better to bring your own lunch. So what have we drawn from this tale of culinary calamity? Lord Hogswallow reminds us to always question the nightmare on Meat Street. Unless you want to spend your evening praying to the kitchen god for forgiveness while secretly wishing for a humble piece of toast. As the sun dipped below the horizon of the 14th century, we find ourselves in a small, cramped chamber adorned with tapestries that do their best to mask the pungent aroma of unwashed peasants. The flickering candlelight dances ominously on the stone walls, casting shadows that seem to mock the possibility of a decent night's sleep. Welcome to a typical medieval household, where sleeping is an extreme sport, and the motto is "No rest for the wickedly awake." Meet our protagonist, a man of average stature named Gregory the Sleep-Deprived. Now, Gregory is not just any serf. He is a proud product of a time when quality sleep was more elusive than a sane king. Gathered around him are his fellow villagers, their tired eyes resembling those of imprisoned raccoons. They prepare for their nightly ritual that might as well be classified as an Olympic event. The intrigue of counting sheep to lure oneself into slumber. In the background, a rooster crows unexpectedly, reminding us that in his world, no sound signifies sleep like the crow of impending doom. The room is filled with the sounds of snoring, or more accurately, the death rattles of men who have long since bowed to insomnia. The pungent smell of hay fills the space, a hint of stale ale trapped in the air like a bad joke that never lands. Central to this saga is a rather tired-looking sheep named Filbert, chosen randomly as randomness is the measuring stick of sanity in these times, to be the victim of Gregory's nightly obsession. As it turns out, counting sheep was less about falling asleep and more about entering a war of attrition against one's own consciousness. To successfully count sheep, one must be creatively equipped. A stick and an ounce of insanity were essential, as well as a firm belief that each sheep they counted wouldn't turn out to be a judgmental goat. As he begins his verbose counting, 1, 2, 3, it soon devolves into an all-out crisis. Every fluffed cloud of wool that hops over an imaginary fence brings with it layers of complication. Has he counted that sheep already? Is that one even a sheep? The answer is usually muddied by the effects of persistent ale consumption, leading to panic that his fellow villagers are forced to endure as Gregory begins to compare his sheep-counting skills to those of his neighbors, igniting a competitive spirit that should probably exist in less sleep-deprived settings. The tension rises dramatically as Gregory loses count for the 4th time, prompting him to swing his stick in a fit of frustration. This abruptly wakes up Ethelred the Groggy, who had dreamt he was being chased by an army of butter churns. Ethelred leaps up, yelling that Gregory's sheep might be demons or, worse, relatives. The shocking twist here, of course, is that in the chaos, Filbert the Innocent, despite being merely a sheep, indeed manifests qualities of a full-blown usurper, attempting to eat Gregory's estranged cousin's tunic hanging on the fence. It turns out that even a sheep has aspirations who knew the producers of wool had such rich character arcs. Amidst growing hysterics and accidental facepalm moments, it becomes abundantly clear that the medieval pursuit of sleep is both a battle of the mind and an existential crisis brought on by mere woolly figures in the night. Ironically, it's not the sheep that become the focus. It is the delightful absurdity of the whole scenario that rouses them awake instead. Suddenly, sleep becomes a distant memory, and the search for restful oblivion dissolves into bickering and unmet nocturnal hopes. Yet they all remain united by the collective annoyance of the sheep spectacle. So what's the takeaway? If you find yourself struggling to get a good night's sleep, remember, medieval people often found comfort in counting the impossible. And if that doesn't work, just be like Gregory. Swing a stick and make it a communal event, because nothing bonds neighbors like shared insanity. The year is 1323. Picture this: a grand medieval castle, its turrets piercing the night sky like the jagged teeth of a dragon. The setting? A luxurious chamber meticulously crafted for the most pampered, overfed aristocrat you can imagine. Likely named something like Jasper the Indecisive. The air is fragrant with, well, something between the lingering scent of unwashed linens and the faintest hint of rancid boar, uncomfortably blended with floral aromas purported to repel bedbugs. Within this room, adorned with lavish tapestries depicting heroic battles and scenes of idyllic pastoral life that, let's be honest, nobody actually experienced, we meet our key player, Jasper himself. Clad in an array of silks reminiscent of a walking fruit basket, Jasper prepares to settle down for his nightly ritual of attempting to find rest without suffocating under the weight of his ego, and a mountain of goose-down pillows, likely stuffed with actual geese that might still be flapping in protest. But sleep for the nobleman is not merely a function of shutting one's eyes and hoping for the best. No. Sleep in the Middle Ages was an elaborate ballet of superstition, custom, and a smattering of bizarre dietary choices designed to enhance one's dreams. Close your eyes and imagine the chorus of snoring lords and soft whispers floating through the corridors, interrupted only by the occasional clang of a distant sword meeting the ground. The soundtrack of nightmares. As Jasper reclines in his nest of finery, he is eager yet cautious. There are rituals to follow. First, a glass of mulled wine laced with herbs believed to induce prophetic dreams. Musty, but necessary. After all, what's the point of sleeping if you can't wake up with ridiculous tales of the future? Which, of course, he would later take full credit for at court. Next comes the rolling of one's body into a not-so-comfortable position, which resembles a poorly executed yoga move from a history textbook's most unfortunate chapter on physical fitness. This is crucial to drive away negative spirits that might have nested among the hay mattresses, which might explain why they were often so hard, and not because of any ancient craftsmanship skills. Then, like transporting oneself back to the first century's worst sleep hygiene habits, the nobles had a penchant for sharing sleeping spaces with an array of creatures. Mice, dust mites, and sometimes even that one llama owned by the lord who took weird pets to the next level. It was not uncommon for these medieval aristocrats to awaken with more guests than they'd anticipated, wondering how they suddenly became the main part of their own horror story. But wait, the real twist comes with the secret society of dream interpreters who lurk at court. Enter the ominous-looking wise woman, half shrouded in the shadows of the chandelier. She's about to yank Jasper back into reality with her dubious interpretations. "Last night," she'd begin, "you dreamt of a banquet of pies, indicating prosperity, followed by, but also beware of the snakes in your garden. They represent your obsessive fear of criticism. Chew on that, Jasper." This dance with dreams and sleep soon culminates in the darkest hour before dawn, when Jasper inevitably wakes up with an inexplicable craving for oat porridge, a true medieval delicacy mixed with sheer existential dread about the state of his estate. Not to mention the time he tried to wrestle with that llama about breakfast choices. In the end, what can we possibly glean from this ridiculous medieval slumber saga? One does not need a feather pillow or a crystal ball to understand. Sleep like a king, but be prepared for your dreams to be weirder than your reality. And remember, when surrounded by critters, if you can't dream of grandeur, you might as well become breakfast for the livestock. Set your clocks to the year 12X, somewhere in a bustling medieval town where the air is thick with the delightful aroma of sweat, livestock, and an alarming number of unwashed vegetables. As you stroll through the dirt-smeared streets, your feet squelch through mud mixed with who knows what, while the rhythm of clanging metal from the local blacksmith echoes like a poorly composed symphony of chaos. In the midst of this charming ambiance, prepare yourself for the culinary catastrophe that is about to unfold. The Great Sausage Rebellion. Picture this: a community of peasants gathered in the marketplace, not just to haggle for stale bread or moldy cheeses, but for the glorious, legendary sausage, a food revered as much as it struggled to be digested. Everyone is there. The butcher, a rotund man with a fighter's physique and a glorious mustache that could double as an emergency food cache. The baker, trying to convince people that he made the best bread in town. Hint, he didn't. And, of course, the village elder, who peered at everyone as if they were holding an unholy sacrament instead of a sausage. Let's set the scene properly. The lighting is dim thanks to dubious torches flickering ominously like they're auditioning for a horror film. The smell? Think spicy pork mixed with mild regret and a dash of existential dread. And, oh, the noise. Children are shrieking, animals bleating, and somewhere someone shouts about the latest crop failure that's threatening to turn dinner into a sad, dry affair. But, hold on, the tension is bubbling, or should we say boiling, over a seemingly benign platter of sausages. These aren't just any sausages. They're said to be enchanted, possibly infused with the wisdom of the ancients, or maybe just heavy seasoning, hard to discern. Legend has it, there was a prophecy. Anyone who consumed the great sausage would be granted supreme knowledge or, conversely, be cursed to have sausage cravings eternally. Naturally, both the baker and the butcher are ready to capitalize on this rumor. So, the common folk, weary from crusted bread and cabbage soup, are now caught in a frenzy of swallow or suffer decisions. Will they chomp down and risk the dreaded lifelong sausage addiction? As the villagers confront the sausage-laden table, everything starts to spiral out of control. The butcher, ever the opportunist, spins tales of bravery and valor as he brandishes his cleaver like a lightsaber. "Join the sausage revolution," he declares, which, if this were a movie, would undoubtedly warrant a dramatic orchestral swell. Peasants begin to riot. not out of anger, but because one man accidentally mistook a very plump sausage for a weapon and proceeded to wield it like a sword. Amidst all the larcenous, larded chaos, the baker tries to shout sensible advice while holding his poorly baked rolls aloft. Flour? Friends, you don't need transformative sausage. Just roll with the dough. However, his words are lost in a melee of carnivorous fight-or-flight instincts. In an ironic twist of fate, the villagers finally managed to grab their own sausages, only to discover they had forgotten to check for proper cooking techniques. Instead of the gnashing of teeth over supreme wisdom, it descends into an impromptu celebration of food poisoning, a culinary event that would go down in history not as a glorious uprising, but as the not-so-great sausage rebellion. As the sun sets on this fiasco, our villagers learn the hard way that while sausage might seem like a noble conquest, a lack of proper cooking instruction can ruin even the most heroic intentions. So remember, folks, the lesson here is, sometimes the simplest ingredients can lead to the most complex disasters, especially if no one can tell a good sausage from a slow poison. Cue the dramatic music. The place. A dimly lit medieval castle complete with creaking wooden beams and suspiciously placed suits of armor that have seen better days. The time? Some indeterminate afternoon that was only defined by bustling peasants and the lingering scent of unwashed humans. Enter Lord Snorville, a noble whose title promised grandeur, but whose only achievement was the world record for most consecutive naps taken in council meetings. Clad in layers of wool that could rival a sheep's coat in bulk, Lord Snorville had developed a unique strategy for ruling. Do nothing but sleep until the sun went down. The atmosphere is rich with the sounds of snores and the not-so-subtle winks of courtiers who are forever attempting to balance their own sleep patterns with the sheer volume of their lord's beauty rest. Meanwhile, the air is thick with the musky aroma of sweaty peasants trying to charm their sleepy lord into granting them more land, or maybe just a slightly larger door for all their livestock entered encomium. As a meal is served, typically a hefty platter containing the only food the lower classes could afford, dry bread and stringy meat with a splash of stagnant water, every moment of this feast becomes a contest of will. Who can stay awake while the mighty Lord Snorville embodies his namesake? Herein lies a unique medieval ritual. The penalty of the slow wake. If a lord was caught dozing off in front of his subjects, a cabbage would be ceremoniously thrown at him, resulting in an uproarious blushing where all the attendants feigned astonishment, desperately trying to convince each other that the lord's napping wasn't such an embarrassing political maneuver. After all, everyone knew that the best decisions came in the midst of a tour de snore. But the catch was that the lord could not be blinded by vegetables if they had fallen asleep in a position so unnatural that it looked like yoga for the uncoordinated. Even more perplexingly, any subject caught trying to stay awake by utilizing extreme methods such as poking themselves with a bread roll would then be met with the ultimate punishment. 5 extra minutes of listening to Lord Snorville's riveting stories of hunting and knitting. Tension heightened when a mysterious rumor spread through the crowd that a rival noble had invented a potion that could keep one awake indefinitely, the so-called elixir of insomnia. Whispers concerning its potential effects filled the air. Would it somehow lead to eternal consciousness, or just one very groggy noble wearing a crown? As the bread platter cleared away, A flicker of excitement wrapped around the room. Finally, Lord Snorville woke with a start, an instant awakening that could only be described as a crazed battle against gravity. He looked around, eyes wide as if he had just fought a dragon in his dreams. "I've made the most important decision of my life," he shouted, raising a fist in determination. Gasps echoed in the hall. Individuals perked up, daring to believe they might gain fairer treatment. "I've decided to take another nap." With a thud, he collapsed back into his chair, snuggling into a pile of cushions, leaving every subject to contend with their denial and the immediate concern of managing their vegetable projectiles. The sheer irony sent waves of laughter rippling through the castle, because no one was sure whether to resume their crafting or their good-natured scowls. In this fine tale of leisure gone awry, we see the brilliant investment of time that medieval lords spent in their unpredictable slumber, making political decisions that only ever benefited their dreams. For succinct historical wisdom, let's just say that medieval sleeping patterns reveal one simple truth. Napping may be the most potent of elixirs, unless, of course, your castle is infested with cabbages. Picture this. The year is 1387, and we find ourselves in a dimly lit banquet hall of a failing castle in England, which looks less like a majestic fortress and more like a glorified chicken coop. The ambiance is elevated by the smoke of burning goat hair chandeliers and the sweet, overwhelming scent of, well, despair. A motley crew of nobles and peasants has gathered for what can only be described as the culinary event of the century, the Great Meatloaf Fiasco. The raucous chatter of lords and ladies fills the space like a medieval opera full of regrets. A few men are fighting over who spilled their mead on the upholstery, while a lady coughs politely, trying to regain the attention of the room. And then a figure emerges, Sir Reginald, the chef, known as much for his ghastly culinary experiments as for his unkempt beard that seems to have lived through several battles of its own. What is being paraded before the crowd? A meatloaf. Yes, dear viewers, what the royals called a glorious union of leftover meats. This behemoth of a dish was less the centerpiece of a meal, and more a harbinger of doom. It was shaped like a castle, and adorned with what anyone with the barest glance would recognize as a tragic attempt at garnishing with herbs that had already lost the will to live. The tension in the air was palpable, a thick mist of suspicion suffusing the room. You see, meatloaf in medieval times was not just a culinary choice, it was a veritable act of defiance or despair, depending on one's social status. The peasantry had an age-old superstition claiming that meatloaf was a vessel for the vengeful spirits of long-forgotten cows. In fact, some claimed that the meat was a fusion of dubious origins, freshly slaughtered, or an unfortunate neighbor's leftover stew from last week. Rumors swirled that this particular loaf may have contained the remains of Sir Reginald's last 3 culinary apprentices. After all, kitchen mishaps in those days rarely resulted in simple reprimands. As the chef theatrically sliced into the monstrosity, the hall collectively held its breath. A cacophony of gasps hovered in the air like a Shakespearean tragedy waiting to unfold. The first slice revealed an unexpected treasure, a glimmering layer of what appeared to be jewel-like bits of... were those peas? The confusion spiraled. No one mentioned a pea or any form of vegetable in his parchment of ingredients. A perverse thrill spread among the crowd, with whispers of, Is it a magic charm or a produce plot, sending shivers down their collective spines? Tension mounted as laughter unexpectedly erupted. Out came an old woman in the back offering unsolicited advice. "Stop fretting, my lords. Whatever isn't moving is probably safe." This only added to the need to dive deeper into the non-mystical mysteries of meatloaf. An ambitious young knight, fueled by a mix of bravado and pure folly, took the first bite. The room froze. Would he seize glory or suffer instant and ignominious death? Taking a hearty bite, the knight appeared to pause. Would it be a self-sacrificial ploy to save face, or had he uncovered elixirs of ancient culinary mastery? He blinked. He swallowed. And then, like a volcanic eruption of laughter, he burst out, "I think it's underspiced, just like our treaties." As if a spell had been broken and the feast's exuberance reignited, the nobles revealed that meatloaf was, in fact, the perfect diplomatic metaphor. A messy situation that mingled the good, the bad, and the remnants of whatever this village could gather to fill the gaps of hunger. In a triumphant moment of absurdity, they hoisted Sir Reginald onto a table, declaring him the Master of Meatloaf, a title clearly bestowed upon him under the influence of fermented beverages rather than any logical reasoning. What did history teach us today? Never underestimate the culinary implications of leftovers, because sometimes they can turn the mundane into sheer riot, and a whole lot of peas can cause an uproar. So always approach dinner with a sword, a fork, and perhaps emergency rations of oat cakes. Cue the flickering torches of the 14th century. The setting: an unremarkable castle hall that smells of damp stone and regret, illuminated by enough candles to blind a bat. Tonight's entertainment? A multi-course feast that promises to bewilder, delight, and possibly incite gastrointestinal distress for the entire court, if the preceding executions don't do it first. In the center of this intoxicating chaos sits Lord Mortimer, a man with all the charisma of a soggy biscuit and the spine of a wet noodle. Dressed in a gown more sequined than the entire Night's Watch, he prepares to host an extraordinary event, an elaborate banquet that promises a menu so ludicrously extravagant it could only exist in medieval fever dreams. What's on the docket, you ask? Traditionally delicious delicacies such as roasted swan plucked alive, of course, a pie stuffed with live frogs, and the pièce de résistance, a dish named the Bird of No Return, which actually is just highly questionable poultry with a transformative backstory. Now, the tension runs thicker than the sludge that pastes this banquet's decorations. According to local superstition, dining with a foul spirit leads to a very unsavory outcome. It's that whole thing about birds of a feather flocking to questionable dietary paths. The halls grow eerily quiet as the chef, a disheveled man named Grubb, prepares to unveil his magnum opus, a communal bowl filled with a bizarre concoction of boiled wine, curdled cream, and miscellaneous herbs foraged from places you probably wouldn't want to think about. As Grubb struts forth with the bowl like it's the Holy Grail, whispers of "what if it's cursed" float through the air. Guests ponder. Could today's unfortunate dinner actually be part of an ancient hex placed upon their clan for folly brewing sour mead? The court jester, sporting a cap with bells that jingle like a feral cat, raises a red flag. Caution, my lords. One taste and your taste buds may just file for a restraining order. As the tension mounts and paranoid sweats drip down noble brows, the Lord's right-hand man tiptoes forward to sample a ladle of the dreaded brew. The court gasps as he tastes, swoons, and immediately begins reciting the Our Father in reverse, raising fears that he's possessed but may also just be a fan of twisted rituals. Suddenly, as if the night could not be more absurd, an unfortunate incident occurs. Grubb, in a fit of culinary passion and perhaps a bit too much questionable gin, throws the entire bowl across the table in a dramatic gesture akin to a Renaissance painting gone wrong. The remnants splatter over well-to-do nobles, turning evening attire into abstract art and panic into flustered laughter. With all force concentrated upon survival rather than gastronomy, the Lord declares a grand escape. An impromptu chase ensues involving slippery candlesticks and flailing arms. Yet the crux of the commotion culminates when Lord Mortimer realizes everyone's too busy dodging spilled curds to notice that the banquet itself has morphed into a new type of entertainment. The guests are now racing giddily, some yelling, "Not the swan," as they duck and dodge each other, while others hilariously remove baked goods from their kids like crazy hats in an impromptu food fight turned festivity. Amidst the chaos, it dawns on Mortimer they may have unknowingly invented medieval dinner theater. Perhaps even the first instance of a court-wide team-building exercise that's not just centered around lethal jousts. Historical context? Well, the medieval era truly embraced fascinating yet bizarre culinary practices, often leading us to ask, was it food or torture? So, what did our Lord and the quirky knights learn? In the end, one could conclude, when life gives you spilled curds, throw a party. Who needs formal dinners when you can have slapstick dining experiences instead? Picture this. The year is 1412. The place? A damp, dark castle somewhere in the foggy English countryside, where sunlight is as rare as an honest politician. And what's wafting through the chilly air? The unmistakable scent of roasting rat, somehow both appetizing and questionable, courtesy of the resident chef who might actually be a sorcerer. Yes, medieval life was mysterious, but not in the way you might think. It involved a lot of gnashing teeth and an excessive reliance on leeches. Now, our star character, Sir Reginald the Relentless, is a knight burdened with the noble task of winning battles and losing sleep. This warrior has a problem. Insomnia. That's right, folks. Back when the biggest issue wasn't screen time or caffeine levels, it was the mystical and terrifying specter of sleeplessness. Picture a knight covered in armor, tossing and turning on a shredded straw mattress, his dreams filled with visions of dragons and discount warlord therapy. In the midst of this sleepless tragedy, enter a trusty sidekick. The court's herbalist, known affectionately as Old Granny Herb. This is not your typical apothecary. No, Old Granny Herb stands out with her smoky-tongued wisdom and an uncanny ability to recall every single family feud in the kingdom courtesy of her cough syrup-induced memory lapses. She just so happens to possess a secret brew guaranteed to knock any knight right into the snoring sands of time. Of course, such concoctions come with gimmicks. This one was no different. Her potion, a swirling mix of valerian root, fermented cabbage because. Why wouldn't it? And just a hint of despair required careful consumption. Tension mounts as Sir Reginald prepares to down the foul-smelling brew. With a face contorted in a blend of disbelief and desperation, he grimaces, recalling his last distasteful excursion into herbal remedies, where he found himself frightfully ill at the wrong end of a feasting table. In that moment, he remembers the court's ongoing belief that any food given during a blood moon is cursed. To this day, those who dared feast under lunar influences were said to have suffered the terrible fates, like discovering maggots in their soup or becoming dance partners with the Grim Reaper at the next shindig. Reginald, in his desperate delirium, clutches the potion before him, pondering whether a night of fitful sleep is worth the risk of suddenly becoming possessed or suffering the dreaded fate of spontaneous combustion. Surely, a few minutes of the upside-down sleep would not be worth eternal damnation. So, grasping the chalice with the bravado typical of medieval knights, he gulps it down, ready to embrace whatever fate had in store. Surprisingly, it kicks in remarkably fast. Slumping against the wall, he surrenders to the sweet release of sleep, only to awaken abruptly a few hours later with the most misguided of ambitions. He's now convinced he can dance with the very ghosts of his ancestors. Realizing they are as clueless about footwork as he is about dragging his own conscience across the castle's stone floor, the spirits wail as they stumble into one another, sending crashing pots and pans cascading down the keep like medieval confetti. The lord of the manor is thoroughly unimpressed, rightfully so, considering the ghostly jigs and with Reginald inevitably face-planting into a pile of rotting cabbage meant for stew. Now, here's the kicker. Rather than facing wrath for waking the inhabitants of the castle, the knight gained unexpected fame. Local bards eagerly turned his failed spectral dance party into ballads of glory. The catch? Reginald was now better known as the Ghost Whisperer, rather than the Yawning Knight, and he had inadvertently become the talk of the realm. So let's wrap this up with a marvelous lesson. If you must dance with the undead, make sure it's while you're supposed to be sleeping, because in the Middle Ages, all things can lead to fame, relevance, or at least a footnote in history if you survive the after-party. Picture this. The year is 1321, a damp autumn night in the quaint little village of Broadbottom, where the air is perfumed with the unmistakable scent of wet hay and something sharply pungent, like an unwashed sheep who decided to crash the local tavern. The candles flicker ominously, while the villagers gather to share tales, or, more accurately, share who has made a terrible choice for supper. In the middle of it all stands Edgar, the village ale-wright, a man whose beard is home to more crumbs than a bakery floor. With a barrel of his latest concoction bubbling in the corner, he claims it will help cure ailments ranging from the common cold to the desire for a job. What's on the menu tonight? His innovative potion of doom, a dubious brew that promises a good night's sleep provided you survive the early evening booze fest. The tavern is dimly lit and filled with the clinks of tankards and the squeals of overexcited pigs. Unbeknownst to them, they'll be tomorrow's meat. As Edgar saunters to the center, a silence descends, thick as the ale coating the floor. Patrons lean in, eyes gleaming with curiosity or perhaps a dash of gastric distress. In a most theatrical manner, Edgar lifts a slimy flask over his head, the contents moving suspiciously like something from a witch's cauldron. One sip of this, and you will drift into realms of peaceful slumber, he cries, only to follow it up with, or you might run through your dreams screaming, but we never talk about that part. The villagers are anxious. Sleep is their ultimate goal, especially for those who, like Thomas the Tired, have taken up the glorious pastime of dozing off mid-potato peeling. Little do they know this folk potion is merely ale laced with a generous handful of valerian root and an ambiguous amount of mystery herbs for flavor. The esteemed brew doesn't have a scientific backing, but let's be honest, neither did the theory of gravity at the time. As the first brave soul volunteers, a bold widow named Genevieve, who's just looking for a distraction from the noise of her drunken husband, the tension in the room is palpable. Will she pass out blissfully, or make a spectacle of herself, shouting at the ceiling? With the crowd's eyes glued to her, Genevieve raises the flask slowly to her lips, takes a heroic swig, and swallows hard. The room collectively holds its breath, waiting. Seconds turn to minutes. She stares vacantly at the far wall, not knowing that the other side of it has been declared entirely unsafe by the recent rat infestation. Just as the villagers begin to mutter about sending for a physician, because surely one sip couldn't be this dramatically anticlimactic, Genevieve suddenly begins to snore louder than a dying boar. The villagers erupt into cheers. She is their sleeping goddess. A full-blown serenade of snores ripples through the tavern. The laughter intensifies as, one by one, the customers reach for their own flasks. Visions of gentle desserts dancing through their ale-influenced heads. Who needs sheep counting when you've got Edgar's potion of doom? The room erupts into a sleep contest. Tax deductions for households. Chaos breaking out between drinking competitions. And, as night falls, a village wise man insists on concocting an antidote to prevent potential hungover tomorrows. The next morning, perhaps feeling the weight of 100 sheep on their heads, the villagers awaken to the reality that they had become the punchline of the best joke they'd ever tried. Sleep might be an ale away, yet discovering how it goes round in circles was not. Now, according to historical records, or at least what folk memories passed as records, the changing of substances in ale revealed that dreams were simply the brain's way of sifting through the insanity of a day filled with drunkards and reckless sheep. So the next time you think of sleeping through history, remember one mug of ale away from tedium, and you might find yourself at the rodeo of dreams, sounding out more than mere giggles and oinks. Remember, folks, a sound sleep isn't just a state of mind. It's a punchline waiting to happen. Picture it. The year 1347, somewhere in Europe, where winter is a lethargic blanket laid audaciously over any hopes of a decent evening stroll. The scene is set in a dimly lit castle, where the flickering light of beeswax candles barely keeps the shadows at bay. The air? Stagnant with the lingering aromas of burnt rat stew and an inexplicable hint of despair. The soundtrack to this banquet of ridiculousness is marked by the distant howling of angry peasants mixed with the sporadic clatter of overzealous servants. Meet our protagonist, Sir Geoffrey of Not a Lot Going On, a knight so well known for his remarkable lack of achievements that his coat of arms is literally just a sad-looking potato. He has returned from the never-ending quest of finding his socks, now famished and ready to nosh on whatever gluttonous gruel was laid out before him for the next medieval culinary extravaganza, a massive cauldron of porridge. What is porridge, you ask? An exquisite blend of oats, water, and despair with a side of regret. Tonight's feature is extra special. It's made with a secret recipe that has been passed down through Sir Geoffrey's family for generations. Add water, stir, and hope for the best. As the clock strikes midnight, chaos ensues. To get at this delightful pile of sad carbohydrates, the kitchen has transformed into a battleground where superstitions run rampant. Witness the royal food taster, Sir Gerald the Cautious, a man whose daily mantra is better safe than sorry, while his grip tightens around the bone spoon of doom, surveying the porridge like it's a ticking time bomb. What's lurking in that bubbling cauldron? Was it the devil's food designed to trap a soul, or simply yesterday's leftovers doing their best to revolt? Legend has it that anything cooked after dusk is cursed by the disgruntled spirits of chefs past, eternally seeking revenge for kitchen disasters, particularly the infamous burnt flour incident of 43. So, the kitchen staff goes through a frantic ritual, sprinkling salt over their left shoulders, knocking 3 times on wood, not the oak beam, that's absolutely forbidden, and murmuring incantations that vaguely resemble childlike chants designed to ward off fruit fly demons. The moment has arrived. Sir Geoffrey approaches the cauldron, eyes wide with the excitement of a child at a lollipop convention. As he dips his wooden spoon into the porridge, the entire hall goes silent. You could hear a pin drop, or perhaps a rat scuttling for its life. He raises the spoon slowly, dramatically, as if revealing the Holy Grail. And then, with a flourish, he tastes it, a silence deep as history falls over the assembly. Suddenly, his face contorts with the kind of horror you see in a stranger on a subway who just sat in an unidentifiable, sticky substance. Was it poison? Bacteria? Too many oats? The crowd gasps. The tension thickens like the porridge itself. Will the king call for justice? Will Sir Geoffrey's quest for socks come to a sour end? But hold on. There's something darker lurking here. Before he can yell murder most foul. Sir Gerald, in a fit of righteous panic, bonks his head against the table, and out tumbles his communion wafer from that morning. He had accidentally dropped it into the porridge while channeling spiritual blessings onto the meal. Wild-eyed, Sir Geoffrey confirms to all present that the sacred wafer has blessed the gruel, silencing the kitchen, and elevating this disaster to divine status. This porridge is now a holy porridge, the only food miracle of the hour. As the guests inhale the aroma of sacred oats, they promptly forget about the whole poisoning affair. Eager tongues dive in, and their faith in culinary safety is restored, at least until the next potluck. What's the lesson here? Never underestimate the power of breadcrumbs, or in this case, bread crumbles. During times of crisis, remember, even porridge can go from horror to heavenly with just a dash of belief and a prayer or two, or whatever else it takes to survive the medieval banquet experience. We set the scene in medieval England, circa 1403. The moon shone brightly. The stars twinkled like the teeth of a particularly deranged jester. And in the depths of a cold stone castle, the court was gathering for what could only be described as an absurd ritual. The midnight snack. This was not your average spontaneous munch run. It was a theatrical event of hunger, fear, and culinary desperation. The atmosphere, a dazzling cacophony of candlelight, casting flickering shadows that danced like agitated spirits. The heavy scent of roasted meat mingling with the stench of unwashed courtiers. and the discordant sounds of clattering dishes and whispered superstitions. Locals believed the hour wrought with peril, fostering nightmares or the sudden disappearance of complete bodies. Best not be caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Enter our illustrious hosts. Sir Fatsalot, the overly rotund knight whose armor may have fit better as a decorative piece, and Lady Nibblemunch, the lady-in-waiting who had a penchant for terrible puns and worse cooking. Their first challenge? To serve a late-night meal that wouldn't inadvertently summon the spirits of chefs long dead. What did they choose for their grand offering? A splendid array of medieval delicacies, including a spiced pie containing who knows what, and a dubious brew dubbed House of Horrors Ale, which tasted suspiciously like thirst-driven sadness. Tension filled the great hall amid the tussle of chefs, all desperately trying to appease the whims of a drunken monarch, who at this hour had a higher chance of demanding swan feasts and singing contests over reasonable portions of bread and cheese. Rumors swirled that the pie contained an actual pigeon, and possibly a tear or two from Sir Fatsalot himself, each carved a slice revealing a hodgepodge of ingredients that might ignite more nightmare than appetite. When the sumptuous pie was revealed, gasps filled the air as the court held its collective breath. Would the Lord survive this culinary gamble? Was that a wing poking out? The court's court physician had already prepared a spit bucket, just in case this meal wouldn't end in victory, but rather in the legendary historical anecdote of the Night of the Wretched Pie. In a climactic moment, Sir Fatsalot, mustering every ounce of his courage, dug his fork into the pie's flaky crust and pulled out, wait for it, a ring. Apparently, it was a medieval tradition for noblewomen to hide trinkets in pastries, but not one where unwanted betrothals could occur between mouthfuls of mystery meat. Gasps erupted again, coupled with nervous laughter, as the lady-in-waiting and Sir Fatsalot engaged in a game of absurd name-calling over the ill-fated dish, each blaming the other for culinary madness. Eventually, the squabbling was interrupted by the clatter of utensils as drunk nobles raised their goblets in reckless celebration. The pie was deemed a winner because, obviously, courts react more favorably to humor than actual taste. But even it was a mysterious monster. Everyone managed to settle in after agreeing that whatever it was probably edible enough and would likely not kill them before morning. And lo, what emerged from that absurd feast was both terrifying and slightly more entertaining than bedtime stories about the Black Plague. The moral of this dish: in the weeds of medieval nighttime feasting, where the absurd rules the palate and the nobility may, at times, become collateral damage, always remember, the best way to deal with future dread is to embrace the messy deliciousness of your late-night snacks, unless it's a dish containing an unsolicited marriage proposal. As we draw the curtains on this thrilling, or, if I may say, utterly snoozeworthy exploration of medieval sleep habits and the occasional witch trial, let us take a moment to reflect on that delightful delusion we humans entertain regarding our mastery over the animal kingdom. You see, if history has taught us anything, it's that animals have always been sitting on the sidelines, quietly observing. In our fervent attempts to reign supreme, we've disregarded the age-old wisdom that some of these creatures might just harbor the desire for revenge. Take, for instance, the intriguing case of the medieval goose, a creature so unimpressed with humanity's antics that it often took a foul no-pun-intended stance against its oppressors, hissing and flapping in a show of feathery defiance. Or consider the way cats held court in ancient Egypt, treating humans less like servants and more like their loyal subjects. Histories are rife with documentation, or at least with fevered speculation about the great animal uprisings throughout the ages. From cats lounging on ancient tablets, demanding tribute in the form of fish, to dogs conspiring in packs to steal dinner from unsuspecting laundry hangers. The tales of animal vengeance intertwine with the darkest corners of our past. In fact, what if the infamous Salem witch trials weren't driven solely by paranoid humans, but rather by a collective uprising of local squirrels tired of being demonized as mere pests? How poetic would it be to think that the supposed witches were actually just the unfortunate captives of a vengeful animal coalition? Perhaps the real lesson in all this is simple. The dog isn't just wagging his tail in excitement, he's winding up, ready to make his move while you're busy thinking you're the one in charge. Before you head off into the comfort of your own beds, whether they be divided into 2 tidy segments or a solid 8-hour block, remember that there is no such thing as true control over nature. The next time you stare into the innocent eyes of your beloved pet, maybe ponder if that blissful gaze is not just contentment, but the strategic contemplation of the next great animal revolution. This isn't just a lesson. It's a bow to the absurdity of our perceived power. Let us, then, saunter into the night with an understanding that, while we may prescribe the rules of bedtime, the real rulers might just be waiting beneath the bed. And, with that delicious thought, I bid you good night. Sleep tight, but keep an eye on those animals. You never know what schemes they concoct while we slumber.